SG Reads.
Hello fellow travelers, my name's SG and welcome to the channel. Today we'll be finishing our series of Dante's Inferno with a quick retrospective. That meaning that we are going to look over everything we know about Dante's Inferno, Dante himself, Dante Alighieri the writer, and of course, what does any of this mean? What significance does it have? And does it still affect us today? Alright, but without further ado, let's continue on. If you like this content, please like, comment, subscribe down below. I'd really appreciate it myself. And yeah, let's get started, shall we? Before we talk about the story, let's talk about the man himself. Dante Alighieri is a complicated character, but a very important one nonetheless. He's one of the first writers who actually write for the common people. Back then, you need to have noble standing or education to actually understand the script that was written. Dante, on the other hand, wanted people to actually read his work, so he wrote it in a common language that most people could understand, and would become a major part of education in Italy. Much that is known about him is more speculation than anything else. While we do know that he was an educated person, probably came from a semi-noble family on his mother's side, and that he did want to teach people, for most of the fact. He did fight the church, he fought the Pope, he would even start rebellions with his own group, here and there. None of them worked out at the end of the day due to treachery and traitors in his own group, but nonetheless he did have a Beatrice who was more of a childhood crush than anything else that would later become the main benefactor in the comedy itself. He was a bit of a soldier, so that is true, but you could say that all his life experiences, everything he's been through, has led up to the comedy that we know. I do suggest that you go research yourself. I am not a historian, but I do find it very interesting and what it is that built up these people to make these stories. It is very interesting and very fun to look into. Now that we've talked about Dante Alighieri as the writer, let's talk about the character. The character does share a lot of traits with Dante Alighieri himself, but the way he's portrayed in story is much more to represent an everyman character. Someone that has been through life, has been through a rough life. Maybe he's seen his fair share of bloodshed, or maybe not. We do get this idea that he may have been a knight. We do get this idea that he's done things that he may not have been proud of himself, but still is looking for peace of mind in the afterlife, or is just trying to come back. Dante in the story is us. He's supposed to be our version of us, in a way. He's the everyman with regular reactions. He's not fighting demons, nor is he really doing anything to lessen the burden of them. The thing he can do is listen to them, write down what they're saying, and try to help tell their stories as best he can in the living world. But that's about as far as it goes. As we know, he may not exactly be in the living world himself anymore. So, for the most part, Dante Alighieri, the character, is meant to represent you, me, everyone reading. He is the narrator of this story, but he is meant to be fearful, he's meant to have reaction, he's meant to be disgusted, he's meant to be a person, someone actually going through all these different bogias, cantos, and all these different rings of hell, and even though it doesn't seem like it, what he's saying and describing is very human in a way. There's even points in the story where he can't even describe what he wants to see, or what he is seeing. As for the layers of hell, we can pretty much sum it down to 8 different layers. Limbo, lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, heresy, violence, fraud, and finally treachery. Now obviously these are all loose terms, you could say. They're not exactly straightforward. Limbo being those that have not really done anything they think is too harmful, but still don't deserve to be saved, and or unbaptized babies and artists and writers. Of course, that was just the church's point of view at that point. Lust is pretty much broken down into a much more refined state. In fact, you could say that all of them are broken down to much more defined. That they are not just synonyms, they're multicolored. That you have to understand that they are not just this or that. They have a list of reasons why you're that way. They have a list of reasons why you are in the place you are. Lust doesn't mean sexuality, it just means a lust of something. It means you're just obsessed with something and you want it all to yourself. Gluttony is broken down to just being rich or whatever. It's broken down to more of this idea that you just want everything and you don't care who you trample, what you do to achieve it. It means that you are losing a sense of being in that sense. Greed works a lot in the same way as gluttony, except you don't want it for any other reason than just to have it. You don't want it because it gives you joy. You don't want it because it gives you a purpose. You just want it because you don't want anybody else to have it. And then there are those that just take, steal, and do whatever they can to achieve it. There are even several priests in those chapters where they have taken gold from the people, where they pretty much abandon the rights. Wrath could mean several things. It means that you have seek justice for yourself in a way, but it wasn't founded. There are several reasons why you could be there for wrath. We then go to heresy, meaning you're pretty much... Heresy usually means like non-believers, blasphemers, things that go against the nature of the world or the nature of God overall. So I guess you would pretty much classify heresy as that. The next circle would be more of violence, which is of action directed towards a certain person or a certain body, such as your neighbor, yourself, various other things against God, art, nature, all those kinds of people that would go through that situation. There are several creatures there, like centaurs. There are snakes, lizards. There are very deprived creatures down there, I guess you could say. But it's more of an area where you're just choosing violence for a certain direction. Fraud is pretty much self-explanatory. It's this idea that you're tricking somebody using menial tricks. This usually is for like philanderers, seducers, flatterers, sorcerers, who are, of course, against God, would be them, magic. And most of the times they would be fakes anyway, tricking nobility and the people. Barters who lie about their wares, so on and so forth, kind of like that. Along with hypocrites who claim they don't know what's going on. And then finally, the last of the circles is treachery. Now, treachery is more simplified, I guess you could say, with him meeting different people in the lower form of hell. Treachery is, of course, the home of Lucifer himself, who betrayed God, along with it being more of like a mountainous terrain and a tundra. There we see heads in the sea. For almost the most part, the whole half of the last cantos for Treachery. And they're mainly telling their stories of how they managed to earn their way there and don't really feel like they deserve to be there, nor do they feel guilty of the things they've done, which is something Dante is often picking at. And we do see the devil's there, but he is in fact busy torturing souls to notice Dante himself. And that's pretty much the whole rundown of all the circles of hell for Dante's Inferno, each one having their own set of rules, regulations, and reasoning why you might end up there in the future. But overall, it is mainly fiction. This is more of a mapped out version than anyone has ever thought of in the past. You can definitely see, after looking into Dante's history, why these would be the ones that he would hone in on most of all, including treachery, violence, and of course fraud, considering that his rebellion was taken down by those several sins. Now I'm sure you're asking, why is this important? Well, Dante's Inferno, like I said, was the first one to actually depict hell in a more stylized way, in a more detailed way than anyone has been willing to do in the past. There have been churches that have talked about hell, have threatened the presence of hell, talked about evil, but this is the first time we actually see that there is repercussions for one's actions. Dante's Inferno was actually one of the worst nightmares of Edgar Allan Poe. In fact, this was one of his favorite. It was the idea that your consciousness in your suffering, that you're aware of everything that's happening to you, and that at the end of the day, there is such a thing as a consequence to the actions, whether you intended or not. And that in itself is a scary idea for some people. If they know that they have done stuff that is not exactly of moral standing, they would be frightened by this depiction of hell. And not only that, that each one has their own area. That this was the first time Dante actually brought a nuance to hell. That it's not just guys in red pajamas poking you with sticks for all eternity. No, there is a specified place for you. There is a specified punishment. There is something that does look at your history and say this is the fitting punishment for you. Adding a nuance that has been growing in the recent years and has been referenced several times in modern culture. There are several instances that we do see that the idea of nuancing hell has appeared. Look at the show Lucifer, or I guess you could say Preacher for one. Their depictions of hell, not exactly like Dante's Inferno, not exactly a journey, but definitely do give this idea that there is a placement for everything happening, and that it's not just this cartoonish way of showing it like we see in Looney Tunes, or in ways that the church will depict it. So this has been adapted and accepted into the church and into our media as we know it. There are many examples how Dante's Inferno has impacted the world. There are different ways that I could show, but to be more precise, we could say that it's been referenced since the very early age of the church. That this was a jab at not only the church, but the Pope, but royal officials, nobles, even those of higher class, and that's something that we still kind of do today. The idea of punishment for the wrongdoings that we think are happening. And it has still been referenced in many modern media, like I said. We see it happening in Lucifer. We see it happening in Preacher. We see it in Smiling Friends. That's right, we've seen the lower level of hell, which actually mimics the idea of the frozen tundra with the faces peering out of the water in Smiling Friends. A neat little add-on by them. We also do see this happening constantly in the Mandela Catalog, which, if you haven't seen it, I've done a video about that just the other day. Please go check it out. I really do support it. But shameless plug aside, we do still rely on the idea of Dante's Inferno's ladder of hell. So much so that Dante's Inferno has gone on to become its own entity, if you will. There's been video games about it. There's been movies. There have been various projects. There have been children's stories. There are various different reasons that Dante is out there. Whether it be parodied, whether it be a scene-for-scene recreation, or whether it's just reference. It has an important part in all our culture, not just for being a horror story, but for tickling the imagination of what hell can be, what it is, and what it possibly might be. Overall, I think we all do have questions about heaven, hell, or maybe somewhere in the middle. And this was just a way of explaining what hell is. What does it take to get to hell? It's detailed, it's interesting, and it keeps you on suspense. Some have taken it to face value, but you shouldn't. It's fiction. Dante Alighieri is a real person, but he's never been to hell. It's a story that he wrote through his own experience, through his own anger. And this is what he believes, or may have just written, as being part of what hell is about. And, like I said before, it's been adapted, it's been accepted, and it is still more to come. There are several ways that we have seen this before, and if we have seen Fahrenheit 451, one of the movie versions, we do see that Edgar Allan Poe's story is in the first movie, but when it came to the second adaptation, it's Dante's Inferno, suggesting that this story, this person, will be and is important to history as we know it. It's important to know where we come from. While it may not exactly be everything that we expected, it does give us a guideline and show us right, wrong, or just shows us an interesting story. Something that gives us an idea, an imagination, something that allows us a little nuance into the world. And while it might not be your flavor, it's mine, and it might be somebody else's. I enjoy it, and that's pretty much all it comes down to. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and with that being said, we are closing off the Dante series. And I know that there are still 2 more books to Dante, Purgatorio and Paradiso, but maybe sometime later on in the future I'll get to those. But for now, we'll be continuing on with regular poetry, maybe a short story here or there. When I do reach 200, I do have a special thing coming, and if you want me to do a continuation of that, let me know. And yeah, thanks again for listening. I really do appreciate all those who have stuck with me all the way to the end of Dante's Inferno. And I hope I got a little better at it as I went on. I know the beginning was a little rough. And again, this will always hold a secret, not a secret, but a special place in my heart. Because this was when I felt we really did grow. As not just a channel, but I did as a reader and I did as a writer. Thanks again for watching. I hope to see you guys next time. See ya.